Hello and welcome to another episode of Colorado Politicking. I'm your host, Pat Poblete, and today we are hitting the campaign trail, and there's really not a better time to do that this time of the year than when campaign finance reports are due. And we just passed a deadline for that, so the ever-reliable Ernest Luning will be joining me today to talk a little bit about who's up, who's down, who's somewhat mixed when it comes to the data we're seeing coming in about the money that candidates have collected. So Ernest, let's take it from there. And let's start with the US Senate. Break it down for me. Who's up, who's down, and who's mixed?
That's right, Pat. We've got a much clearer sense of how the crowded field of Republicans running against Michael Bennet are doing. A bunch of them didn't get in the race until October, which was just after the end of the previous quarter. So we were waiting to see any reports from them, find out how they stacked up. Several of the candidates released their top line numbers earlier this month because they had something to crow about, but a couple waited until just before the filing deadline. And some of those we learned probably didn't raise as much as had been expected. Now, fundraising in the fourth quarter, which is September through December, typically dips from previous quarters because of the holidays. People are busy. It's hard to get folks' attention and they're spending money on other things. That happened with the candidates who had raised money for previous quarters and had a record to compare to. But all the others turned in some big numbers in some cases. Bennett, let's just make clear here what the context is Bennett, who is running for his third term, raised $2.1 million in the quarter, and he finished with $4.7 million in the bank. So that's kind of what all these other candidates who all have to run a primary and are going to be spending their money fast over the next several months are contending with. Now, the big winners were unsurprising. It was the two wealthy business owners, Joe O'Dea, who owns a construction company in Denver, and Gino Campana, who owns a Fort Collins real estate development company and a number of multifamily residences. They each brought in around $1 million, with O'Dea slightly ahead. They each put $500,000 into their own campaigns. And from their personal financial disclosures, which have both been filed recently, it looks like they're going to be able to put quite a bit more into their campaigns before voters weigh in June. Now, next was a conservative talk radio host, Deborah Flora. She raised about $300,000 and she gave herself $100,000. This was probably about what was expected and gives her enough to keep going, though it's not enough to really break out and dominate in the run up to the primary. Eli Bremer, who got in August, raised $150, brought his total to just over $400. Not that much. But Ron Hanks brought up the rear. He raised just $16,000, gave himself $12,000, but he's running the kind of grassroots campaign that doesn't need that much money. So, I think it's far too early to write him off based on his low fundraising total.
Now, Ernest, those were the Senate races. What about the congressional races? Give us a similar breakdown there.
On the congressional side, Republican Lauren Boebert continued her streak, the dominant fundraiser in Colorado's candidates for the House. Colorado, we really haven't seen anyone raise money like Lauren Boebert has in the off year. She's a conservative superstar. She has probably close to 1 million followers on Twitter, where she does a lot of her fundraising, small dollar donors. She reported raising just over $800,000 for the quarter and finished the year with $2 million in the bank. She raised 4 times as much as the next closest House candidate, which happens to be Joe Neguse, the Democrat who represents the second CD, centered around Boulder. He's not even facing a Republican opponent yet. So Joe's pulling the money in. He's in a leadership position in the House, and it turns out he gave quite a bit of his money to the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and to 6 House Democrats running in tough races around the country. Following Joe was Saul Sandoval, who appears to be the front runner among Democrats hoping to challenge Lauren Boebert. She also raised about $200,000, but she's spending her money almost as fast as she's raising it, so it doesn't have much to go into the primary. We're going to see what's going on with that. There's a lot of candidates in the other set. How many other 6 House districts around the state, and none of them turned in really surprisingly large figures this quarter. We'll see. It was a tight race up in the 8th congressional district, the state's newest district, where basically all 5, 2 Democrats, 3 Republicans, all raised about the same amount of money, between about $130,000 and $150,000. So we'll see. Those are looking like close primaries at this point.
Thank you, Ernest, for your reporting and your insight, as always, super valuable when it comes to breaking down campaigns in Colorado. And from the campaign trail, let's take it to the State House, and not necessarily to report out a story, but Colorado Politics has an exciting announcement to make, and that is we have a new reporter staffing the State House. Please welcome Hannah Metzger. Hannah, welcome to Colorado Politicking.
Hi, Pat. Really nice to be here.
So you've done quite a bit of coverage of Denver City Council. And one of the things I'm curious about is, so far in your time as a legislative reporter, have you seen a lot of transferable policy agendas, policy goals, ways that legislation can be brought out between your time in the City Council and now covering the legislature?
Yeah, absolutely. Just yesterday, I saw the introduction of a bill that would make restaurant customers have to request single-use plastic items like utensils and condiments. And that identical bill was just passed in Denver last year. So you can see a lot in the way that the Denver city government has kind of led the way for state policies. And I'm expecting to see a lot more in the future.
And last one for you, Hannah. Let's kind of broaden this out a little bit so our listeners, readers, viewers can know a little bit more about you. What policy areas really interest you? What do you hope to cover during your time during this legislative session?
Yeah, well, I want to cover everything and anything. I'm really interested in criminal justice and environmental policies. So that's probably where you'll see me head in the future.
Well, thank you for that, Hannah. And if you didn't realize from the previous couple minutes of video, Hannah is very, very nice. So if you do see her around the State House, be sure to poke your head in, say hello, introduce yourself. Now for Hannah, for Ernest, I'm Pat. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this week, and we will see you again next week.